What we would like to discuss today is how we see a transformation in the open access movement. So how we've moved gradually from a movement that's had as its objective openness of content to providing actual agency and empowerment to the different stakeholders in the value chain of scientific research and scientific results. So we will start with the of setting the scene to understand a bit what this transition means, how we want to talk about this movement from open access to open agency, then to try to understand it deeper. So talking not just about how we access content, but how we give visibility to different rights that subsist in the content, and they are of particular interest and importance to the content producers, to the research producers, the institutions that support them in different ways, whether they are research funding organizations or research performing organizations, but also the organizations that wish to use them, and how the different parts of the value chain lead to each other and how they can be governed. So this transition we're describing is a transition from something that we just govern how you access a resource to how you govern an ecosystem. And that's very much something we've seen in a number of policy shifts. We've seen the past 10 to 15 years, and with great intensity over the past 5 years, starting with text and data mining exceptions, secondary publishing rights more recently, and of course the question of ethics, which seems to be increasingly relevant in an era where artificial intelligence plays a predominant role. Similarly, as we move from the question of the resource as such, as a static thing, to collections of resources and data points and data sets, which is offered through APIs or through different data spaces, forms of data spaces, terms of service become increasingly important. So the legal artifact we used to be focusing on was the license. Now it's the terms of service in conjunction with the license. And we need to see how we make this visible and express it. And then if this is our theoretical framework, let's see how we bring it to practice, how we build trusted and federated knowledge hubs, which seems to us to be the solution for providing agency, for empowering the different stakeholders in the research value chain. And finally, we will conclude with an open discussion as to how this community-driven model for trust and knowledge sharing should be. So I'll start with setting the scene. We've seen the open science as a movement that started in the context of open access. So if we go to initial work of the late 90s, early 2000s, or actually mid-2000s, if we talk about licenses, the whole idea was how are we going to increase access to different forms of content? And this has its origins back to open licensing, which the first open source licenses, like the general public licenses, find their origins back in the mid-80s, but they become really stabilized, and they become the lingua franca of different forms of open resources only in the late 90s. And with the advent of the Creative Commons licenses after 2003, 2004, and their internationalization, we see this movement gathering momentum. Then in 2008, we have the Open Government initiatives, which they bring together the open access movement in the governmental sphere, which had to do with access to documents, and the open source movement together, plus the open content movement, which had, again, at this period, it was doing its nation steps together. And after gradual institutional adoption, particularly by the European Commission, it becomes a very dominant, let's say, force in the area of scientific research and publications. And of course, this movement in the early stages, it focuses on how can I get access to an article? How can I get access to a resource initially? And then on the second stage, how can I get access to a data set? But still, you see the whole thing as being something related to the resource. However, today, we've moved beyond that. And the reason, I think one of the primary reasons, is that we don't need just to have access to the content as such, which can be read by humans, but increasingly we have large amounts of data which needs to be processed by machines in the forms of machine learning and production and provision of different types of services, particularly AI-enabled services or different forms of LLMs. So in this context, in a sense, the whole thing shifts. So you need to have a more stable chain of resources and a more stable value chain, not just the access being there. You need the repositories. You need to make sure that the funders support them. They have operational costs. They need staff in order to be able to provide these services. A lot of the content, most of the content is actually provided through different forms of web services. So we need three things. We need trust. So you need to make sure that you have trust at multiple levels and trustworthiness. And this is reflected also in the AI regulations in the European context. You need to have accountability. So you need to know how the data you are using are sourced. But also, if you are providing research results, you want to know how these resources are being reused, not just in legal terms, but increasingly in ethical terms. And finally, this reuse, you need to ensure it is lawful. And this is something which both sides wish now. So it's not just me that I want to reuse the content, that I want to be able to know this is lawful. Also, the researcher who's ready to release their results under an open license, they wish to know that the reuse is going to be lawful. So we need to be moving towards a model which doesn't exhaust itself in the openness side, as I said multiple times, but rather leads to open agency. So how can we empower not just individuals, but whole communities to decide how their knowledge is shared and reused? And I think this is a marked difference from the 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we were pretty agnostic as to how the work is to be used because we primarily had humans in mind. And I would like to remind that the legal origins of this movement come from free speech and the First Amendment. So they have a very US-centric pedigree. Of course, when they come in the UK initially and then in Europe, they get enriched with ideas of open government, which they become really powerful, and concepts of transparency and accountability. But what is important is that now we increasingly want to introduce and to maintain ethical considerations in the reuse of data. So how have we tried to tackle this? About 10 days ago, we did a first part when we described with Melios Katsamakis the work we've done in the context of OpenAIRE, also with Natalia and Wim in relation to presenting different ways in which you express different forms of rights, ethical rules, and flows of value. So we try to describe a particular scenario where you have, let's say, a set of research publications being released or primary data being released, not just in the context of how I put something in a way which is open and fair, which would be what we would do up to now, but how we understand that in the context of a flow of value. So in that context, we need to be able to express the wishes of different members of a value chain along three lines. Whatever you describe in a legal document, whether this is a license or terms of use or an ethics document, it's always being expressed in three types of, if you wish, rules expressions. What are the things that someone that uses your service or your content must do? Which are the things they can do? And which are the things they cannot do? And no matter which legal document you see, pretty much it can be analyzed along these three lines. And in the universe of licenses, I'll go back to the Creative Commons logic. The whole idea was that you always have three expressions of a legal document. One which would be readable by humans. You need to understand in layman's terms what are the conditions under which you're using a resource. A second layer, which would be a legal layer, so this has to be legally valid, and a third layer, which would be something which initially was just for the search engines to be able to find the content and identify the key conditions under which it was to be used. Now, after these initial kinds of representation of licenses, which in the very early versions of Creative Commons licenses, it would be just the 6 licenses being stored in a stable URI. And that was about it initially. Then the second stage was to actually express them in different rights expression languages. And we had 3, let's say, main families: the Creative Commons right expression languages, CCRL, the ODRL, the Open Data Rights Expression language, and the MPEG 21 XRML type of licenses. And these were mostly, type of statements. And these were all machine readable versions of the licenses, which would adhere still to the same rights logic which we see in the second bullet: what you must do, what you cannot do, and what you can't do. So what we know now is that this was a very good and important first step. And what we've learned in the over 20 years of working with open science is that you cannot really you can distinguish analytically, but you shouldn't separate rights and value. You should always think, what is the value that is produced as a result of an act of releasing something open? So when I release a scientific resource, what's in it for me? Why am I doing that? And there are different reasons and different types of value, and they are not always monetary. This is not always monetary value. So where we are now is in a stage of a new phase of openness, where we need to have not just the visibility that open access gives, but also to provide voice, responsibility, and control of the content to the different stakeholders in a value chain. And if we have openness without agency, we get transparency without power. And if this sounds too high level or too abstract, very simply is this sense that lots of researchers have, that they are being ripped off by their work being reused without them not necessarily getting a compensation, but at least getting a reference. So getting something which in their value system works. Similarly, organizations which are providing this data to the communities, particularly research performing organization, research infrastructure, information infrastructures, and hubs, they need to be able to maintain the infrastructures to be able to provide these services. So if they get, increasingly different hits different calls in order to provide data, this exhausts the infrastructure, and there needs to be some sort of value recuperation model. So there needs to be a way in which somehow these values being recuperated. And this doesn't mean necessarily direct exchange, but there needs to be something there. So this is the kind of access via AI which makes it so visible. So what we see in the era of AI is that increasingly we have large language models providers to require to have legal and ethical access to sources of data in order to be able to train their models and provide their services. So I don't know, Natalia, if you want to touch upon this one in terms of how research is changing. I can talk about it, but yeah. So I think the difference is very much the thing that we see even outside the realm of research, which has to do with how people are used to access content. So up to very recently, the main thing was, if you want to find something, Google it. And we would talk about the Google effect and how the level of service that someone would demand from a repository would be a Google level service, like something which I can find easily. Now we are facing instead what is called the Google Zero effect, which means that researchers increasingly relying on AI assistance for their initial exploration, they will not necessarily hit your as humans your website. They won't hit your repository as humans. It could be that some sort of an AI service is going first to be trained on your data, especially if they're open, and then these data are going to be part of the LLM. The direct source consultation is declining in favor of AI synthesized responses. They still will make references to the primary sources, but it's not necessary that the researcher is going to always go and dig deeper to them. And that means that, and the reason why this is the case is that people rely increasingly on speed rather than verification, and they get their first type of response. If they need to dig deeper, they will. The resources are there. We're seeing increasingly how I'll go back to Google because it's a very interesting phenomenon. What is happening is catching up with ChatGPT is now at 550 million users in comparison to 600, about 660, 680, which is OpenAI ChatGPT, and is increasing. But still, the whole mode of searching has changed. And this, in a sense, creates a different digital norm as to how you access content. So very frequently that we were going to have a research pathway, which is going to be bypassing the original sources or having very heavily mediated or embedded into AI content. So if we had the classic model being the researcher would perform a search, then would look for the source, and they would evaluate the source. The researcher would go for AI chat, they would get a synthesized answer, there would be an action. And there is an increasing loss of source awareness, a critical evaluation, which if it comes later. There is also another phenomenon which comes in relation to that, which we see it both in the work environment and the general audience, which is the whole work slop or research slop thing, which is people would actually rely on AI results to produce something which is going to be not necessarily correct, or it could be even nonsense. They're going to pass it to the next stage, and it's going to be passed to the next stage until someone has to actually do the verification, but at a much later stage. In other words, the access to your content is going to come much later compared to what would happen even just a couple of years ago. So this means that we need to see how we manage to position ourselves as research performing organization, or research funding organization, or even as LLM providers in this particular context. Natalia, shall I pass to you now?
Yes, you can. Hello, everyone. I will continue with, just to add on what Prodromos said here about, what we are doing actually in infrastructures. So we have the primary sources, which are repositories, open access journals, preprint servers, and the like. Then we aggregate the content. We could create this bibliographic plus databases. And then we are starting to train AI based on these graphs that we're building, but also, getting back to the content. And, this is the process until, we reach down to the user, what Prodromos described. So the idea here is that what we need to understand, in today's talk, is that there are so many players now in the field before it's the user decision. So before we had the two primary sources, maybe an aggregation as a gateway, but then going back to the primary sources. Now we have all of this, the three additional boxes. And this in three additional boxes, that means is that knowledge, as Prodromos said, is propagated and it's changing hands. I don't know if this is the right word, but it's changing hands and it's changing, different types of ownership. And this is where, the ownership problem, is where it starts from and how it's propagated. And at some point, I think, what we see now is because of the AI agents and the AI LLMs and the additional models that we are seeing more and more, is that the primary sources mainly, and then the aggregation, the graphs and everything, they are going into the background. We cannot do without them, but what the researchers, what the institution managers, what they see is, the interface, to the interface. This is what I wanted to say here, Prodromos, about it. So maybe you can go on to the next slide.
So the question that comes here is a question of ownership. But I think we need to approach this question based on the value chain that Natalia presented before, is in the context, who owns knowledge and who benefits from it. So AI and federated infrastructures are redefining ownership. And this is because the control shifts from individual creators to systems that aggregate and reuse knowledge. If you see as the big users, the ones that train LLMs and refine LLMs or create RAGs, even at the local level, it means there are constant aggregations of knowledge. And once you have that, it means that you create a database, which at least in the European, both in the European and I would say extra-European context, it means you create a new property rights over the collection of data that come together. And this, in a sense, shifts ownership, but also it imposes a certain burden as to how you're going to serve this data to the next chain, the next part of the value chain. So knowledge is collective because precisely, and we know that because that's the AI services we get. They are based on knowledge which has been collectively created. However, the value becomes centralized. So it means that open contributions, they are being extracted by closed models, and this challenges the fairness of use. And this is something which has always been a discussion in the community of open science and research for many years now. But the scale of extraction is such that introduces the need for a more ethical reuse of such data. And in that sense, if you just see the individual resource with a license, it's like seeing the tree and losing the forest, missing the forest. You need to see how collections of material get collected. They are placed on a certain infrastructure, and then they are being reused and not just extracted by other members of the value chain, other parts of the value chain. So what we're missing here is a governance structure. So we need to move from licenses to governance. And this governance allows this transparency at the different levels as to how data are being reused and how value flows back to the content creators. And in a sense, and I think this is something which we need to very seriously consider, even at the European level, what happens when you have literally trillions of dollars into investment in AI infrastructure by private entities? How can you see the European investment in infrastructure, public infrastructure, which at the best is in the tens or hundreds of millions? And what does it mean in terms of the compensation of the actual content creators, which in a sense is the blood in this body, which is the infrastructure on which the different AI and LLM models are going to be trained? So in each case, we need to, first of all, understand we have at least 4 layers of rights. And I apologize here for not being totally analytically precise, but this is more for reasons of presentation and understanding the key characteristics of rights. So the first big category would be different forms of intellectual property rights, copyrights and patents being the most important one. important ones. Copyright is pretty much the basis on which all the open licenses or most of the open licenses work. But patents here are increasingly relevant because it could be that they trigger a particular limitation in the access of data or research results. So they play a role both in terms of the existing knowledge, which is being assessed on the basis of what has been published. So understanding what the state of the art is to a great extent depends on the open access material and other research results, open or closed access. But at the same time, they could trigger in relation to the openness of certain content, a trigger as to when the content is to be released or how it is to be released. The second element, which is increasingly relevant, is the whole question of personal data. So as the data which are amassed are increasingly contain different forms of personal data, we need to know that. And if a data set contains such data, the different types of legal bases upon which someone can be based in order to process this data have to be transparent. Consent is possibly the most well-known legal basis, but it's not the only one. It could be a public task, it could be a legal obligation, it could be a legitimate interest. There are multiple, there are 6 legal bases and another 10 if we talk about special categories of data. We need to be able to document those if they exist in a certain data set, so the reuser knows how they can reuse such data. The third type of rights has to do with ethics. And here we just have identified 3 types, but it could be many more. And I think this is an area of research which we need to explore deeper, particularly in relation to the AI Act. But going outside the AI Act, at least what we know from the experience in terms of the ethical conditions that different content providers and research producers and researchers want on their data to be there is the integrity of research, which it's a big question to what extent it is violated through the use of the relevant research results in an LLM, fairness in the way in which they are being represented, and that's a huge subject, a huge topic. How is fairness being understood by different stakeholders in the value chain? And of course, attribution, which we have, of course, the attribution stack issue, but how attribution happens through an LLM service, possibly through the provision of the relevant sources in the AI result. But this is something which is very much related to what the user experiences when you provide results through an LLM and particularly through a chatbot. Last but not least, all these things which normally, all these 3 layers which normally you would see at the level of the data set, they are then being wrapped by some sort of service which is provided through a repository or another service provider or another infrastructure. And this service is being provided to a machine through terms of service. And here, this is something which is extremely important to see how it is being represented in machine readable form, and how are you able to resolve a conflict between multiple terms of service that come from different service providers, which could be infrastructures holding different data. So if I'm training a model and I use 10 or thousands different APIs as my sources, how can I make sure that the terms of service provided, granted by each of the providers of the data is not causing me any trouble, is not incompatible with each other? It's something which is transparent to me, and I understand what it means also in terms of data quality, provenance, compensation, etc. So we're working a lot on trying to standardize those terms of service, or at least trying to see which are the most common ones and how they can be expressed in a rights expression language. So in terms of the legal and policy dimensions of open agency, so if this is the framework, let's see how the different forms of legal instruments, which we have seen over the past 10 years, have affected and are affecting the way in which we use these expressions. So the first one is the text and data mining exceptions, which is text and data mining, either as an exception or as a policy. It defines pretty much when an AI training and large-scale analysis are lawful. So it's absolutely essential that if you have an infrastructure which is open and allows TDM, you need to make sure that these conditions are machine readable and transparent. And this allows both, this is valid both for the infrastructure that provides the data, but also for the service, which then using the data provides the service to the researcher or to another node in a value chain. And these kinds of conditions as to how TDM is to take place enables responsible reuse and compliance in an AI-driven science. The conditions of the text and data mining should not be, they should not necessarily equal to the text and data mining exceptions. So here we talk about text and data mining as a practice, which could happen either within the framework of TDM exceptions of the copyright directive, or it could be something that happens through terms of service that are expressed by an infrastructure provider who which allows TDM on their data. So in both cases, you need to have these terms in a machine readable and standardized and transparent way expressed. The second thing is the secondary publication rights, the SPR. And here, this is not something which we've seen in a European instrument. So this is not EU-wide. We have them in different jurisdictions, being implemented in different ways. It allows authors to share their publications publicly, even under restrictive contracts. In the countries where this has been implemented, it bypasses contractual terms. It's absolutely important when you have an SPR regime in a particular jurisdiction and an SPR regime is implemented in a particular collection, these kinds of information should be in the metadata, again, machine readable, transparent, standardized, so that allows a very clear legal framework, but allows different types of value models to flourish. Last but not least, we have the ethics and terms of service. These are absolutely important in order to deal with the question of attribution and how this should be done. This is an issue that we have faced like the past 20, 25 years. I think we have quite solid technical solutions as to how the data being used can be attributed back to their source, either through different forms of identification of the creator, like ORCID, or different ways in which you can identify the source and the provenance of the specific data sets and research. And of course, this kind of alignment with different legal regimes is the one that completes the open agency framework. So in order to do that, what we've just said, which pretty much, to oversimplify it, means whatever legal instrument you use, and this should not be just licenses, but it could be data protection, conditions of processing, ethical rules, terms of service, terms of use. They need to be expressed in a standardized way. And we need to go from the XML model to something which is easier both to be expressed and to be reused. So what we propose is to actually go to the Open Rights Expression Language Framework and the EOS Rights Metadata Language. And the idea is to create these languages and vocabularies where we can express in JSON format different types of rights across categories, and then use them as the building blocks for the repositories to produce to express their different types of legal documents, but also to allow different constellations of stakeholders to agree on something, and ideally to automate any conflicts between multiple and sometimes even conflicting conditions by different content providers. So these kinds of frameworks, by increasing transparency, in a sense, they bring issues which they were kept under the carpet in the front. So the first thing is to be very clear about what different people want on different layers: ethical, intellectual property rights, data protection, terms of service. What's their value proposition? So, for example, a researcher wishes to have attribution in order to allow them to advance in their career. And it could be that an infrastructure wishes to be compensated for the costs of providing the service. And it could be that a research funder needs to increase access to knowledge. All these people, if they are to be in a hub or a data space, they need to be able to express their value objectives and then to express them through a rights expression language in a very simple way. I don't know if Natalia, you want to say something about the knowledge hubs, or I should go on.
Can I take over?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me share my screen because you need to stop sharing because there's animation and I don't want to. Let's see. Share. So what are you able to see? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Natalia.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm taking over now, and then Prodromos will come back. Is about what our proposal is and our thinking. You know, let me say it's a thinking process, but it's getting shape because as OpenAIRE, we are, as many of you know, we aggregate metadata. We have lots of PDFs, and many SMEs are asking for the content. And I can explain, what we think the process should be. So the idea is that, repositories are becoming trusted, valued sources of ground truth. That's how I would put it, because there's the institution behind them that curates the knowledge, that safeguards the knowledge. So how can we build on repositories or other trusted open sources like open access journals, and how can we move together in the next era of what access and open access and open agency means? Okay, so the idea is that federated repositories must coordinate governance standards in these knowledge hubs. I will explain how we view the knowledge hubs in the next slides. Where we discuss about all of the things that Prodromos said about rights metadata for reuse. Maybe license is not enough anymore. This is my understanding that we're going into an era that license is maybe can be a bit naive, and also how we're going to do that. Let me hide. I'm trying to hide my screen here because it's. Okay, it doesn't hide. I'm sorry. Okay, so let me see how that goes. Okay, so this is how we are doing things now. We have institutional repositories, institutional or commercial open access journals. We have a diamond open access journals. We have other, trusted open sources. Okay, maybe now I will focus on publications, or I will let's focus on textual data. Let's see textual data. What we're doing now in this area is that we have we work a lot on metadata, and we tell them how to do it. And then we have aggregators, many aggregators around the world, that we get this data. We build graphs or catalogs, and then what comes is that we have these developers of large language models, or now SMEs and industry, that they're doing AI all over the place. And what they come to us, they ask for the graph, because the graph is very good. The graphs are very good in how you are shaping your AI models in order to do pre-filtering or post-filtering. It's called a technique called RAG, augmented graph something, resource augmented graph. But then what they do is that they go back to the open data sources and they start collecting, all of these PDFs, many PDFs. And as we know from Core, and Kathleen is here, Core is doing some work, because the repositories have seen a very great increase in the hit rate. So how our people are hitting the repositories, and because they're open access, they allow the content to flow around. Okay, so this is how it is being done. But what are the problems? If I can say, first of all, oops, I'm sorry. I'm trying for you that have been wondering is that I have these controls up there that is that they are okay. Now I can move them. Um, for these things is that what we see is the high volume traffic to repositories. So that means for repositories, probably most probably is that they have to upscale and upgrade their infrastructure. There are different access mechanisms for repositories. You know, how do I get to the actual PDF? Because we know that there is a harvesting of metadata, but getting the actual PDF may require a lot of effort from these, you know, SMEs and innovation. I would call them innovation actors. Okay, then what they're doing is they're doing a lot of effort in cleaning the data, because even if you get a PDF, that's a lot of work in order to make sure that, you know, you break it down, you extract data from the tables, from the graphs and everything. And then when they're building a product or they're building a service, there is this, you know, update frequency and timeliness, which is, as an SME, it's really killing them. Okay, so that is a process that can only be afforded by the big tech. Google is really good at doing that, and they have been doing it forever. That's why we have Google Scholar. That's why we're going to have this co-assistance now. Maybe OpenAI with Bing is good at doing it, and a few big tech, mainly in the States. But what about the rest of the SMEs that, you know, they want to really innovate? And then the other thing that is always the case in the back of the mind of many people, especially Europeans, not so much in the US, is the reuse. As Prodromos said, is it lawful? Is it lawful for me to go and get a PDF there? And then if I reuse it to build a model, and this model I can sell it to somebody else outside, so it's the value chain. Is it, you know, are they going to have it in ethical? So this is what we need to think about it. It's not, you know, an individual researcher coming to this graph and getting, you know, a PDF or 2 PDFs or 1,000 PDFs. We're talking about millions of data exchanging hands, and at some point, you know, in the value chain, somebody's going to use it for some purpose. And then
Sorry,
we are
Natalia, just to
yes,
jump in, I think
yes, please.
what is the difference that makes a difference is the volume. So this is impossible to clear by human lawyers. It's impossible.
Yes.
Either you have to work with huge assumptions or with exceptions and limitations, or just have so much money that you don't care, and you just you become liable, but you essentially don't care. You're too big to fail.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I think what we are suggesting is that you shouldn't be doing that. We suggest there is a way to express your rights and not to get lost in this ocean of data and content that's being reused at a humongous scale. Sorry for that. Just wanted to explain
it's
why
okay,
it's so
but, you
different
know,
from 10 years ago.
It's in the next slides. This is how we do things now, and this is, you know, not how we should be supposed, you know, we should be doing things. Okay. And then if I can go back, and, you know, as OpenAIRE, we are involved in the European initiative, a program from the language data space, that they are building a fine-tuned scientific large language models. So the role of OpenAIRE is there to provide content, and then also to, you know, to see how we can build applications based on this fine-tuned LLM, which hopefully will build more accuracy than, you know, ChatGPT or Gemini or the known beasts out there. And what we have discovered after, you know, a few months is that we have in our storage about, you know, about 60 million publications, and then we are wondering, you know, how can we share it within a project that is going to be done for research initially, but then, you know, after the project, we don't know how it's going to be used, these models. And we focused on, you know, everything that was open and that we felt secure in sharing, you know, and mainly CC0 and CC BY. And what we found out is that only 15% of the 60 million had a permissive license. So now we are, and this is, the content that we have been aggregating, from different sources, from repositories, from OpenAIRE journals, from agreements with publishers or scholarly societies. So that is a problem. That is a problem for OpenAIRE, if we want to become, from aggregator and, serve these communities. It's a problem for the developers of AI and LLMs. And also, as I said before, it's a problem of the repositories because, they don't know how, where the content will find their way. So what do we do? So what we propose, and this is, just in the making, it's very, very rough, is that what we should do is, first of all, we should create hubs, okay? And these hubs, the way we propose that we should create hubs is, we're not, we become, not just aggregators, but we become hubs of trusted content for science and scientific content, okay? And we're starting with publications because publications is, or blogs or scientific, anything that is there is volume-wise, it's manageable for the hubs. If we talk about data, scientific data, I think, this would be the role of the research infrastructures. But what we want to do now is not just to have metadata, but to have agreements with all of the sources to get their PDFs, XMLs, and whatever in a trusted way. Then what this hub should do is, apart from the graph that this is an ongoing work, is to clean them. I put XML there, I don't know, what it should do, but we should clean them in a way that we should be serving this data to these, I'm trying to, okay, to these LLM developers and AI developers in a very, clean way so that, they find an added value into what these hubs can do. But what is missing from this picture? Okay, this is, this cannot be the old way, just plus PDFs and cleaning of data. What we need to do is we need to have, what Prodromos described is we need to have somehow these data sources between, an agreement between these data sources and the hubs on how their data will be used. Probably not per record, if possible, even though that individual researchers can do that. But, hopefully that institutions, they can do this by sets, not maybe one set, but by different sets. So if using what we're doing, and the language that we are doing, and, augmenting this process of, data exchange, because it's not just harvesting, with additional information of how this can be used, then these hubs, and, we can have multiple, I can imagine that we can have multiple trusted hubs around the world, is that, we become the gatekeepers of these data. And then there is the other thing is that, yes, we are going to be cleaning the data, but then how we are packaging the data would need something, that could have, perhaps a different schema, a different, way of packaging, annotating it. And in all of this is where, again, I'm coming back to what Prodromos said, because I think he said it very nicely. I hadn't heard it before, is about the governance, okay? So this, ODRL, schema, vocabulary, protocols, implementation is very technical. But before we go into this technical, is that we need to understand this process. We need to understand, the terms of use and reuse, okay? Technical operations, I would say smart IP, smart licensing, and all this DRL. But then on the other side, apart from that, is that, how hubs, as gatekeepers of this content, which let's be honest, is that these hubs do not own this content. They are gatekeeping this content, okay? The ownership is back into the repositories. What we believe, and, maybe this is by we, I think it's more personal, so I have to wear my Natalia hat here. And I say, these developers, they make money out of it. Okay, it's not just for the propagation of the knowledge. They're making money out of it. Of course, there's going to be for research purposes, which it can be accessed, but we should also think about part of the governance, a business model that is win-win for the industry and the community. And in this case, the hubs are not just becoming content, hubs of content of metadata and PDFs and XMLs, but they become the community together who are setting that. Because let's be honest, these data sources back here, they could benefit from these business models up there. So this is, like a brokering, like a European wide or a global wide or continent wide. I don't know how that would go, but what I see the value here is that we need to coordinate and we need to move into something like that so we can feel comfortable that these investments here are somehow compensated. Maybe funders will come and say, because we want to support the industry of our countries, you do that, but we give you money. So no, not money has to be exchanged over here, but maybe this is public funding. I don't know, but all I know is that there has to be a business model because they are doing business, and we, the community, we need to see how, and the community and the governments, we need to see how this is going to be shaped out for their own, for own purposes, especially as we know that the research and development, the research funding in universities is going down in almost every other country, okay? So this is what we propose. And then Prodromos, I leave this, 2 slides more, and this is yours now to guide the discussion.
I think this is something which is necessary in order to have accountability and traceability. This is the time and that we need to go beyond just providing access to resources. In a sense, it's very reminiscent of, structurally speaking, of any kind of object-oriented logic. You start with the small objects, which are the items, and then you go to greater collections, and you need to have a certain form of encapsulation in order to be able to present in a meaningful way the terms in which the content is provided. And just to because I was just seeing the comments before I opened the discussion. I would say that what we're trying to do is to move to a different model of how you can actually develop, release open content, and how you can develop open ecosystems. I think we had in the past years talking about how as open as possible, as close as necessary. I think here we add the elements of trustworthiness and accountability and traceability. What I want to say before I saw the comment by Christina, who I'm very glad that she's here. Yes, I think we've seen different data spaces have certainly been an inspiration for what we're talking about. How, in other words, and particularly the OAEBUDT, the Open Access initiative in relation to monographs, in the sense that you need to have different stakeholders that come together, they develop a governance model, and we are able to exchange content in a trusted way. So I think, yes, Christina, you've certainly been a model for that. I think the difference in terms of what we are describing here, it's not so much to going to the super detailed and fully end-to-end model that we have in the context of the monographs, but rather going and trying to have a rights expression language which is as universal as possible, to identify the different modules across a range of documents, from licenses to terms and conditions to personal data policies, in a way which is machine readable, and then to develop different mechanisms to resolve these conflicts. The governance structure, I think pretty much we have to search for them in the practice that's, for example, OAI-BUTT has done, or international data spaces have done, or European data spaces have done. I think what we're offering here is a kind of a language to do that, inspired by what happens in the data spaces context, in order to be able to then try to identify mechanisms for conflict resolution at the terms level, at the license level, and the policies level. So in this presentation, and this is the work, the research work we're doing with Natalia and Melios, is what we're trying to do is basically identify, if you want, the molecular level of this model and a procedure as to how we can actually structure different type of ecosystems in a way that value is presented value is being given to different stakeholders. So I think this is the key question for us. How do we have a language to express different types of rights, and how do we structure different governance model in order to be able to resolve these conflicts?
But Prodromos, I think there is a question by you can maybe you can I don't know if you pronounce it, but think about it. Okay, but I like the question because it's practical. Okay, so what Yuka is saying is that where we say about LLM developer training, okay, that could be Elsevier getting this content, okay, and training their model. So what they're asking is, the universities, are we going to pay them again? But the idea here is that, this is what I said, you guys, that, if they want to get the PDFs for training, then they should pay. Somehow they should pay. Then the thing is, that's why I'm more inclined to the business model than to the funding model. But then the idea is that if we can do the hubs, okay, why can we do this, this science direct open science direct AI? What we did is that it took us about 20 plus years to have substitutes for Web of Science and Scopus via OpenAIRE Graph and OpenAlex. And what I'm saying here now with these hubs, that we can do it, but we can do it our way, legally and lawfully and ethically, is that one of these LLM developers could be us. LLM or AI-driven, developer. So of course we cannot stifle innovation. I think we should move into a way that others are able to to use this data and use these hubs. But also it could be a public hub. It could be a public hub and public science direct AI. So that's how I would view things. And if we do not move fast now, okay, then it's going to take us another 30 years or 10 years until we see, can we do this, public science direct AI? But coming back to you is, do we want to do it like Elsevier does? We can do it the quick and dirty way, or can we do it, the right way by allowing, by allowing the content creators to have a saying on how this content will be used? That's the key thing here. What do we want to do? Because
I think there is this discussion about
there's a trade-off. Yeah,
it's a trade-off, but I think we also here talking about structuring a way to do it, and I think there are two. There are a number of components. I think there is a component of how you express different legal instruments in a three-layer structure: human readable, machine readable, and legally readable, and standardized. So this is, and how you make them transparent, and this by itself is a major task. So that's one thing, the rights expression language. The second thing is to make sure that this as a tool is provided to the researcher, so the very micro level, or the research performing organization, which is not a big organization necessarily, or it doesn't have the resources in a way which is open and affordable. So this is a very important component as well, and that's number two. The third one is to identify different ways in which the stakeholders in the value chain, they can identify their value model. What is their value model? So we need methodologies to make this clear and provide models for people before they actually start drafting policies to actually be able to express their desired value in a way. And we've done that in CERN with our workshop, but I think we need to work more as to how you allow researchers or institutions to express their value proposals. And then I would go to three, which is what Christina is also suggesting, that has to do with the how you actually create a governance framework which actually represents the different stakeholders in a particular value chain. And I think this is the kind of the last part. So the governance model, in order to get there, ideally you should have the other components before, so you are able to actually deliver value and be able to express it in an actionable and machine readable way.
So I think, if there are no questions, because we are time, and I think, we took more than, by chatting, if you have me and Prodromos, we can talk for a day, with no stopping. I think what we need to do is probably to start thinking about it in more practical terms. My concern is that I like this open language, open rights management language. It's just that, we need to think as a community, how much do we engineer that? Maybe we can, is it over engineering it? The second, this is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Then the second thing is about, the money flows. All of this costs money, and if we let it to Elsevier and the likes of Elsevier, okay, I think, Yuka was correct. Is I should have done, commercial and public there in my second. When I think more about it, is that. We should step in as a community. These hubs is the first place, but then, if we have the right people in the group, then we can ourselves as a community build these models and build these AI things. But we are going to have the same problem, because we need to have this content, and the use case is in LLMs for Europe. For us, we cannot really, we can use this content, the 50 million, but is it going to be lawful? Because, we're not just a company, we are OpenAIRE, and everything we have to do is, by the book, to respect the community. And if the community doesn't have a license, or it has an iffy license, then, can we use it? Because it's not the right thing. On the other hand, others, like the big companies, the big tech, are not doing the right thing. So where is the boundary? And I think this requires the community to get together and discuss about it. And what I would like to ask Prodromos, and the group here, if you think that, we can have a workshop on this, not a webinar like this anymore, but a workshop where we can, we can get these ideas, because I'm pretty sure I described something that I have in mind for the past 6 months, but I'm pretty sure with a workshop, we can shape it and co-shape it and co-designing, also the language that Prodromos and Melius are working on. Would that be of interest to the people? This is something, like an open call to a workshop, and then to see how we can move forward. I see a lot of silence. No hands. Okay. Yes, I think, Christina, maybe, maybe you want to speak if you want, but these are the questions that we need to, we need to articulate the questions, okay, and formalize the questions, structure the questions, and then, we need to have some kind of a process what the community wants, because my feeling is that the community is not aware of these issues. It's not just what they want before, is what they want and what are they willing to uh, to uh, commit to. It's there is an awareness phase. I don't think it should become a commercial service, but I think it should have, but I think it should have, it should be a hybrid service that for communities, for the universities that are inputting and are getting, they should have it for free. For commercial providers who are getting money out of it, they should pay. Maybe you want to say something?
Yeah, Christina,
Yeah,
but
Christina.
Just very quickly, I think the other question that Christina poses, which is very important, is how many hubs do we need? Yeah, and I'll pass to Christina.
Thank you so much. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to hear about the trusted hubs. For those who don't know me, I'm the executive director for the Open Access Book Usage Data Trust, where we've essentially created and piloted a hub for the exchange of open access book usage data in particular. And we've had this question, we've been looking at sustainability. All of our stakeholders, of course, publishers, libraries, discovery services, aggregators, they have brought up that for this to be sustainable, it can't just be books, it can't just be open, it has to be pertaining to open and closed, and it really needs to be much broader, which has brought us to this question. But we've also learned there's a chicken and an egg challenge, where to fund these and get people to invest in them, there needs to be enough critical mass of players at the table for there to be value by exchanging through this hub. I just want to flag for everyone, our reality right now. We have our grant funding run out next April. We are in the process of doing, Natalia, what you suggest, going to our community of stakeholders to say, should we collectively support this? And one of the challenges we have right now is, some of us are based in the US and the UK markets. All markets tied to library and scholarly communication right now are a bit unusual, I'll put it that way. And we are having trouble raising those funds in the current climate, which I think just speaks to the role of national public infrastructures and funds like what the Digital Europe Fund is doing right now. So this question of how do we sustain it after grant funding is very acute. And I think it does merit us asking. And the other thing I'll note, coming out of IDW week last week, I hosted a Birds of a Feather session on data spaces, and it's important to note that we are starting to see them come up, not just in Europe, so the European data spaces approach, but Australia, Canada, Finland, they were all sharing how they're trying to support data spaces as well, which begs the question if those trusted hubs will be industrial in focus, like we're talking about here for the research ecosystem and scholarly communications, or if they will be national hubs that have to interconnect. And I just flag it as another level of complexity when we think of how many hubs our organizations have to pay into to participate in, or if that'll be like the internet and interconnected.
I don't know if I can answer, respond to these questions. Is that, I can say that, if we focus into this, for example, let's say PMC Europe or PubMed, okay, they're a hub of such information. They have the content, a lot of content. They can build their own AI tools, so something like that exists, okay, already. So and I was thinking when I put these hubs there, I was thinking one of them to be such a hub, because they can focus on, for example, life sciences. CERN also is gathering information all about high energy physics, so you can say that they are a different hub. So at some point in time is that all of these hubs, they should be somehow interconnected, because what they do is they gather content, okay, on specific rules, and then they share content on specific rules. So now the idea is that, what I would like to see is that, can we have a few global initiatives of scientific LLMs, for example. I know Allen Institute is building a lot of these, for science and AI. So can AI Allen Institute work with somebody in Europe, and in order to do something, global? And somebody in China, perhaps, think about it, the vision, the limit is the sky, but the hubs, I think they are very much contained. So they can be national hubs, they can be, thematic hubs. They do exist. It's just that the back and the front interface, doesn't exist. And how we deal with commercial players, that does not exist. So if you have a hub, and I know that PMC Europe, there is a way that they are doing things to deal with commercial industry. In OpenAIRE, we don't know what they do. So can we get together and see, what they do and learn from each other? I think this is, this is where I say these hubs, I put them in so we learn from each other. They're not competitive, or they can be competitive. Competition is good. As long as, the rules are that. Again, this is this is our thinking. It's like a brainstorming thinking and where we're going. And then, what we're trying to do, and because, in OpenAIRE, we're trying to combine the work that Prodromos is doing in the language, in the research, in the digital rights management, together with the idea of the hubs. Okay. And then, at some point is that maybe, a license can be enough, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I mean, this needs to be further evaluated. Okay. I think I have to go to another meeting. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.